In today's episode, we're going to identify the top 3 instances of miscommunication. We're also going to give you 3 tips to help you communicate effectively and steer clear of any misunderstandings. Two Brothers Talking. I'm Israel.
And I'm Eli. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you hear, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and click that little bell icon so you can make sure to be notified when we upload new content.
If you like the show, you can support us by sharing the link of this video and our channel on your social media pages, in your family group text messages, and basically anywhere that takes a link.
Yeah.
We appreciate that. We also want to give a shout out to someone who's been giving to the show monetarily. That's Michelle Clark. Every month she's been sending a gift. The link in the description. Don't feel obligated to do it, especially this time of year. We know money is tight, but if you'd like to support us and help us take this page to the next level in terms of quality, video, all of that, go ahead and follow that link and give us a monetary gift of your choosing. We'd appreciate any support you can give.
Thanks.
Now, the first instance is pretty basic instance of miscommunication. That's what we meant wasn't what we said. And I think we've all been in this situation where we've said something, but it wasn't exactly what we were trying to say. Like our mind is saying something. And I think I said this in our live. Like my brain was trying to say something, but my mouth didn't want to say what my brain was saying. And that can often lead to pain points and miscommunication.
Yeah, I know I've been there. I've said something that just comes out wrong. You know, a lot of times in saying something that wasn't what I meant to say, it's because and this is just me. I'm not saying everyone that does this maybe, subscribes to this, but it's typically because I'm lazy or I'm in a hurry, because I'm not saying the words that are specifically going to mean this. We're used to things being specific. I think, especially in the English language, things can be very, very specific. The more words you know, but a lot of times when we say something, we use vague words. We may interpret or miscommunicate what it is we're trying to say, and it can typically just be because we're in a hurry. Or maybe we're not sure of what we should say, so we just kind of blurt out whatever sounds good at the moment, and then once it comes out, we're like, "Oh no, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
That wasn't what I meant at all."
I think I ran into this instance a lot when I was a new leader, feeling a pressure of saying something in a business meeting, especially when there's a moment where you go around the room. What are your takeaways? I think that's well intentioned and it has its place, but in every single meeting to end on let's go around the room and let's get everyone's takeaways. I think that puts a lot of pressure on speaking quickly without really taking a step back and evaluating, is that even adding value to the conversation?
Yeah.
Or you just want to hear people talking? At the end of the day, when we speak, it should be to uplift people. It should be add value and try to avoid that stagnant kind of just talking just to talk. And that is where I experienced that struggle with me as a new leader, not knowing that it was okay to not have something to say all the time. Because if you always need to have to say something or there's an obligation to say something, that's when we generally say something we don't mean because it's
Yeah.
just like we have to get it out right away.
I had a meeting with a leader once. We discussed. I don't even remember what we were discussing. We discussed stuff for a while, and at the end of the meeting, I was over by their door, and they said, "Hey, you were really quiet today. I don't. Is everything okay? Like, is everything all right?" And I said, "Everything's fine, but realistically, I didn't have anything of value to add."
Hmm.
I agree with what you said. I put my 2 cents in when it was valuable, but I just didn't have a whole lot to add. And I talked in a previous episode about there's two different types of people. There's those who speak because they have something to say, and then there are those that speak because they have to say something. That's typically going to come from one of two places. And I think you really hit one on the head. Either there's pressure that they have to say something, and that could be external or internal
Yeah.
pressure.
Right.
It could be, hey, what are your thoughts? And you feel that pressure, like I have to speak now. Or it's an internal pressure where like, oh, I have to say something. I can't just leave it in silence.
Yeah.
Or it's because maybe of a nervousness or anxiety because like they feel that there's pressure where there may not be,
Right.
and that's much more internal.
I think, and you know this about me because we've been around each other for quite a number of years. But I'm often like quiet, and often people think I'm upset,
Mm,
especially
yeah,
if we're having a conversation. But I'm really thinking, trying to choose my words, not because I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, but because I want to be intentional about what I say. And I mean, there's conversations where you're just having a back and forth, and you're just shooting the breeze.
yeah,
But if you're dealing with a tense situation, or you're talking about an important topic, especially in business, you want to really think things through. And that's one of the things that I struggled with. Was I wanted to think things through because I'm very much a thinker.
yeah.
um but that pressure, like you said, and sometimes it's external, but then when you're struggling within, like, I have to say something, or you're that person that has to feel silence with something.
Yeah.
You put that pressure on yourself, and then that often, reason number two, leads us into, we say something that we shouldn't have.
Oh, been there.
And this is mostly seen in heated arguments, where you're listening to respond, so you immediately fire off the first thing that comes to mind.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, both parties involved in this, really, it hurts both people, right? It hurts the person that you said something hurtful to, but it also hurts you because you don't want to be that person that hurts somebody else,
Yeah.
but you just did it. And so you're beating yourself up. So right off the bat, everyone's hurt in this situation. You end up, instead of being understood, you immediately lose credibility in the
Mhm.
conversation. And the reason why is because you stoop to the lower level of insults and plain defense, instead of just listening to understand, and then taking a moment, if you need to step away from that conversation, doing so. But this is generally when you say something that you shouldn't have, where all that pressure's built up and you're just like, I gotta say something, and you say the first thing that comes out of your mouth, and that's often not a good thing.
Yeah. One of the main tenets of anyone who's ever been in anger management training or anger management therapy or anything, it's if you feel it boiling, distance might be a good thing. Um, Either putting physical distance or just taking a moment and not speaking. Because, like you said, you're gonna say the thing that's either that you regret or
Yeah.
that's hurtful. And speaking from emotion is rarely a good idea. And I say rarely because there are times you should speak from emotion. As an example, when I proposed to my wife, I was very emotional and I was speaking from the heart. But truth be told, a lot of times if we speak from emotion, it's going to be heated. And anytime we're angry, we like to bite with our words.
Mm.
And realistically, sometimes the best things you can do at that moment is just my dad used to say, "Never miss an opportunity to shut up." And I mean, it sounds crass, but really, there's a lot of opportunities that we don't take in conversations. A lot of opportunities to just, what, I'm going to hold my tongue. I'm going to let them speak their piece, and I'm going to respond effectively, and try to mitigate this conflict. But we get in our feelings. We try to just, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
You want to come at me, and then suddenly we start throwing our own kind of sauce back at them. But we really need to take advantage of those opportunities to just, what, I'm just going to bite my tongue, have that self control. And it's not easy. It's definitely a skill I think we have to develop. And that leads us into number three. What we said was misunderstood. So this kind of ties into something I think that's lost in our generation. We keep finding new ways to express ourselves, but really few are willing to expand their vocabulary.
Hmm.
Like, I know people who know all the latest, and most frequently used like slang words, but you use a word that has more than four syllables, they're lost. And I think that is in such the reverse to what it should be. And granted, a lot of people think, I'm on the inside, I'm a cantankerous old man, but I really feel like there's so much more value in learning how to express yourself effectively, and utilizing a larger vocabulary, because then I can say specifically what I mean. And if they don't understand, then I can just break that down. But when what we said was misunderstood, there's typically one of two things, or one or two places that we place the responsibility. A lot of times it's easy to say, well, they just misunderstood me. Okay, why?
Mm.
Like, a lot of us stop at that first thing. Well,
Yeah.
they misunderstood me, so it's their fault. Who was speaking?
Yeah. I think I struggle with that a lot as a young adult, like
Hmm.
having that frustration of always being misunderstood. So instead of taking responsibility and asking questions, or even clarifying what I am trying to say, I just said, you know what? Fine. I'm not going to say anything. And I think that's an attitude I see a lot today. Is
Yeah.
there's this,
Go to the extreme.
Exactly. Fine. I won't say nothing and then there won't be any misunderstandings. Okay, that's fine, but you won't grow as a person.
Yeah. What does that get you?
When you talk again, you're still going to be brought back to that same point if you're misunderstood. Are you going to be like a mute for the rest of your life? Like there has to be a point where we take responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to do. And I struggle with that so much because of course nobody wants to, be wrong,
Mhm.
especially when it's a lot. But that's something that I had to work through and find that it's not the other person's fault that they misunderstood me. It's my fault. And like you said, there's some perceptions and just the way they view things, but that's not my job to control what they see. It's
Mhm.
my job to speak clearly. And at the end of the day, if I've done what I can to think things through, speak clearly and clarify any misunderstanding that may have happened. If they're still at that point of thought, then I've done my job. I think it's a really hard place to be in. But right now, if that's where you're at, you have a choice to make. And it's either take responsibility and say, I'm a major reason why there's a misunderstanding
Yeah.
because I keep walking away from this conversation instead of staying and seeing it through and clarifying. And like you said, maybe explaining it, maybe word choice was an issue. So saying something else using this is the best time to use a thesaurus, not when you're writing a resume,
Right.
but when you're trying to find another word for what you're trying to say, I think that'd be a great place to start as a thesaurus.
Yeah. Well, and that would take time. So I think that's a great segue into tip number one on how to help avoid these things is slow down. Tip one is just slow down. It's hard stuff. It's a lot easier said than done. And slowing down when we speak is an effective
Mm,
but not easy solution to many of our issues in communication. Anyone who's ever, uh, I think, been on the phone now, we speak really quick.
yeah.
We have people we know in our life that are known for speaking fast, and it's difficult to understand them. We worked with customers who were older and they were more they were a little up there in age, and they would constantly tell people that we worked with, "Hey, slow down.
Mhm.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, having a hard time understanding." And I've been, guilty of this. I've been guilty of speaking quickly, of trying to just get everything out. One thing I learned as a facilitator and as a teacher, both with, the public, with children and with the private sector teaching adults, is there's a lot of value in slowing down and speaking purposefully. When you speak seldomly but effectively, there's a lot more gravity to what you say,
Yeah.
and people hear you, people listen. I noticed this when there were meetings when I was taking part of when I was in my previous role. We would take part in meetings, and I wouldn't speak a whole lot because I wanted to again make sure what I've said added value to the conversation. And when there were opportunities to speak, or I, said, would you mind if I would put in a couple of words, or if I asked a question? I noticed that everyone in the either in the physical meeting or in the online meeting on my team would kind of stop and like they would drill right into what I was going to say, because when I was in that professional environment, I was very very purposeful with
Yeah.
everything I said, and I wanted to either make sure I understand or communicate something that I did very clearly, and I would always follow up with, "Does that make sense?" or "Was that clear?" Because I wanted to ensure that what I said came across.
You ever run into like a kid who's really excited to tell you something and you're like, whoa, 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 slow down. It's because they're speaking so fast. You're trying to catch the first word and it
Yeah.
runs by you. Oftentimes when you're in a business meeting, you're in a conversation with a friend, it's important to slow down because there's a lot of emotion in the conversation, whether it be positive emotion, maybe it's negative emotion, like you're upset about something. You slow down and take a pause that allows you to collect yourself.
Hmm.
Because when you collect yourself, you can then articulate. And I think that leads us into our second point of thinking before you speak. And you said it in our Thanksgiving episode, our words are like bullets. Once they're out, you're not getting them back. And whether it be in a disagreement, whether it be in a professional setting, wherever you're speaking, once you speak, that's out there. And to your point of having that positive perception of you, like when Eli speaks, we know it's going to be something good because he's thought it through. You could create that opposite perception. If you're always talking, you're
Yeah.
always have something to say about everything, then people are going to drone you out. Like there's really no point to doing that. So thinking before you speak sets you up for not only success in allowing you to collect yourself and your emotions and choose your words, it also gives you the opportunity to build that brand of, hey, this person is speaking not just to hear their own voice. They're speaking because they're adding value. And I'm looking forward to what this person has to say
Mhm.
because, it's probably going to be really good. And that there's a balance to that, right? Because you don't want to spend the whole meeting trying to find that perfect word and trying to sound just the best because then you could that whole meeting could be over and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, I want to say something and it's done. Your moment's gone. So there's that balance, right? To be able to think before you speak, but also speak when necessary. And dad always taught us that you have a notepad, you use your
Mhm.
phone, whatever the case may be, something to write on. So that way you can capture your thoughts, whether it be a question you intend to ask or a statement you want to make. Maybe it's the takeaways portion of the meeting that
Yeah.
you're in. Write down two or three because someone might steal that, and then you're stuck with nothing because you're like, oh yeah, what they said. When you think before you speak, you have to delicately balance speaking when thinking because if you're spending that whole meeting or whole conversation thinking, you'll never have the opportunity to speak. So make sure that you're splitting that thinking and speaking 50-50.
Learning more words and choosing them wisely is, I think, a very helpful thing, because you're going to express yourself more effectively. You're not going to make yourself, you're not doing this to make yourself look smart or kind of lord it over folks. Like I chose this word because I want to sound like the smartest person in the room. But you're doing it to communicate more effectively, and that's really the heart of what we're talking about today: is how to avoid some of the pitfalls of conversation, how to get yourself in a place where you're communicating effectively, and if you stress out about using the right words, you can kind of put yourself right back in the same boat where you're saying things you don't mean.
Yeah.
Like there was a conversation from a show that I watched uh, where this guy asked a question and the other guy answered. And he's like, "No, the question was hypothetical." And he's like, "And I gave you a hypothetical answer." And he's like, "Are you just using words you don't understand to sound smarter?" He's like, "Well, now you're just being transcendent." And it's like this guy was clearly not. He didn't understand what he was saying. So at the heart of all of this, you have to remain honest. Don't do this because you're trying to get a leg up on people, and don't try to avoid pitfalls just to, again, sound smart. But all of this is just so we can communicate effectively, because the number one thing in almost every convert or every relationship I have is communication.
Mm.
There have been times where, I've been frustrated with someone, they've been frustrated with me. And after we talked it out, we realized it was nothing. Like they had one perception, I had another perception. Turns out we were both wrong. There have been conversations, you and I have had where, we were just kind of sitting there like looking at each other, like, and then we sat down and talked about it and we were able to work it out because we talked. And being able to communicate effectively is going to avoid so much stress, because you're taking the moment to make sure to say
Yeah.
you're saying what you need. But at the same time, you're not, like you said, just freezing up in the middle of a meeting because, hey, I had to come back to that joke 30 minutes ago if you guys had the time.
Yeah, and I think that's another balance too, because I could see someone overthinking it and trying to learn all kinds of new words so they can bring in into their conversation. And at the end of the day, the don't overthink it part is the other person at the end of that conversation is a human being.
Yeah.
Start with that. And if you start with that and keep that, especially if you know the person, you can avoid so much conflict by instead of, well, what do you mean by that? Simply, hey, that person is my brother. That person
Mhm.
is my friend. So let me start there. Would a friend hurt a friend? No. So I'm going to assume that they're not trying to hurt me. I might ask some clarifying questions. Is could you explain that to me versus what do you mean by that? And I think when you don't overthink a conversation and you
Mhm.
don't overthink trying to say the right thing all the time, you start with the fact that the other person at the end of the day is my friend, my coworker, my boss, whoever it may be. They should all be treated with respect. They should
Mhm.
all be treated with some form of dignity. And if they're family, with love, right? And so not overthinking it should come to that simple point of I don't want to assume the worst in people. I'm
Yeah.
going to instead live my life by assuming the best. And especially if I know the person, I'm going to go with based on their character. This is what I know. They're a good person.
Huge step.
And doing that simple thing will then help you communicate with your vocabulary. It'll help you communicate with your word choice because you're no longer viewing them through this lens that they're the enemy
Yeah.
and that they're trying to harm you through that conversation. again, it goes back to responsibility. You have to own it and say, I might be perpetuating some type of perception about them that they don't deserve. I might be creating this whole idea of what this conversation is supposed to be
Mhm.
instead of having that conversation with the person. And so, not overthinking it allows you just to keep things simple. Uh, and my dad used to like the it was to keep it simple, stupid. He loved that because it's just really simple, just keep things simple.
Yep.
It's harder to overcomplicate things because you have to create these side conversations and these side thoughts going on in your
Yeah.
head while
What
you're
do they
still
really mean?
trying to listen to what they're saying when in the end you're not really listening to what they're saying because your mind is somewhere else.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us for that episode. If this added value, be sure to subscribe and share this video and the channel on your social media pages. We appreciate any support you can offer.
And lastly, what are some tips that you may have to make sure that you communicate effectively? Share in the comments below, tag us in a video or tag us in a post that we can respond to. We want to know your thoughts.